Welcome back to Laughing in the Dark, the podcast where I hang out in haunted places with comedians. This is another fixture in our Sunday Minisode series where I talk to you about your ghost stories. For this Minisode, I spoke to Brian from Salt Lake City, Utah. Brian told me a story about fascinating interactions that he had with a psychic that he calls Mary. Here's the call.
Hello.
Hi, is this Brian?
This is.
Hi, Brian. This is Sarah calling from Laughing in the Dark. How are you?
Pretty well. How's your morning?
It's been. I actually had a really wild night last night, so it's been a really interesting couple days.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Okay.
How about you?
I had a really early night and early morning, and so I was just kind of reviewing the story before you called.
Oh, fun. Okay, good deal. So I have in my notes that you're in Salt Lake City, Utah. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, and is that where your story takes place?
Yes.
Okay.
It's from back in 2012.
Okay.
Are we ready to just go at it?
Sure, yeah. Or if you want to tell us something about you, just to kind of get a little feel for who you are.
Oh, for sure. So this is back in 2012. I was in a different headspace at the time, for sure. So there's a lot to the story that, could be garbage. Like,
okay. Mm-hmm.
It could not be. Yeah, it could be the way I don't think it is. But this is just how I experienced it, and so that's what I want people to take away. Like,
Absolutely.
I'm totally okay if like everything in the story is like actually not true, like in the way that I think it is. That's fine. But so this is just how I experienced it because there's a lot of weird stuff.
Okay. I think
so
that
myself,
is kind of like a common thing that people do, or they try to like rationalize something, and they're like, well, maybe this, maybe it was my imagination, but this is what happened. I swear to God,
Yeah. I don't think it was my imagination, but if it is, then that's fine. I'm not like staking my life over the truthfulness of this. I believe it to be true. If it's not, then whatever.
Okay. I'm with you.
Yeah. So back then in 2012, I'm a musician. I was playing in a few bands at the time. And I was really getting into, for lack of a better phrase, new age stuff. For about 4 years at that time. So from like 2008 to 2012, I was really getting into like, what is consciousness? What is the meaning to life? I was getting into like meditation and nirvana, higher states of consciousness, that sort of stuff. Crystals, astrology, just the whole gamut.
Oh yeah.
You can sum up as new age stuff. I personally don't like that phrase new age, but I guess that's what it is. So whatever.
Yeah, like a blanket term.
Yeah. So I was really into that, along with my guitarist friend. He was a little more into, so I was more into the spiritual stuff because when I was growing up, I was just obsessed with like ghost stories and stuff. And I was way into that. Before I'd met him, he was in the Army. And then he came back, and he was a lot more into conspiracies, government conspiracies, and I was more into spiritual stuff. But we managed to connect. I showed him what I knew. He showed me what he knew, yada, yada, yada. So back then on Facebook, his old neighbor, now I'm not going to use anyone's real name here.
Yeah.
His old neighbor, Mary, she hit him up on Facebook and they hadn't talked in a long, long time because, back when they were growing up, they were neighbors. And so they end up meeting. Mary tells him something along the lines of, I have no idea why I'm going to tell you this. I usually don't tell people this. It's not something I like to talk about, but I am an empath, psychic. I can feel things. I can know things. I see auras, yada, yada, yada. And my friend, he's like, oh, wow, that's actually amazing. And it makes sense that you would tell me because I'm way into that stuff too. So is my buddy Brian. Let me introduce you to him. So he brings her around, and she's one of the key players in the story. And there's just a lot in the small time that I knew Mary. There's like 3 major episodes. I'm mostly going to talk about the main big one at the end. But to just really quickly as I can skip through the 2 previous events. So when we first met, there was this girl I was kind of into, who I'd brought around. I didn't know her that well. I just know that I liked her and she liked the same music I did. So I invited her around to our band room, and she had started, she brought spray paint and she tagged up our room, which was fine. That was actually kind of normal for our band room. Mm-hmm. But Mary, the following day just called me out of the blue, says, your band room has a dark entity attached to it. I need to go over there right now and take care of it. And I'm like, whoa, what? So she, again, I'm skipping a whole lot here.
And she didn't know that girl tagged your room?
She did not.
Okay.
She just said, there's something up with your band room and I need to come take care of it. She eventually found out about this girl. And so she came over, she did her thing to cleanse the room. We painted over all of the tags. She said that tagging our room was essentially creating portals for this girl's demon to get into our room.
Crazy.
So I kind of want to bring up this episode, even though I skipped a lot, because Mary called this girl. She said that she had a perfect possession. And so one of the reasons why I want to tell this story is because through my experience and my understanding is that demons aren't what people think they are. Like, people expect like The Exorcist or The Haunting of so-and-so movies that are out there that, people become basically psychotic and scarred up face and just crazy. That's not how it works. A perfect possession is where the demon has such ultimate control of the person that you don't know that there's something wrong with that person. You think that person is just normal.
Yeah.
But then they do just stuff that's just like really detrimental to themselves and others. And so Mary was saying that this girl is perfectly possessed. She gets impulses from the demon, basically, and she freely acts upon those impulses, believing that it's her own impulses, and doesn't question it whatsoever.
Yeah, because you said when she tagged your room, after you said that, you said, and we were pretty much fine with that because that's kind of the aesthetic of the room. But does that mean that she never even asked you guys to do it? She just went to town?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's bizarre.
And so, and to essentially, so we cleansed the room. I painted over all the tags. I never invited her over again, but through the grapevine about a year later, I found out that, to further play into the fact that she's perfectly possessed, totally goes along with whatever impulse she gets from this thing. I heard that she had went off to Las Vegas, was basically prostituting herself, but what she would actually do is then rob the people who were there to pay her for sex. But she did it to one guy that wasn't about that, and she got into a lot of trouble. But the point is that her life story is probably very, very crazy. And I'm skipping a lot of it that I know, but it just goes to say that, someone doesn't have to be flying and screaming, your mother sucks cock in hell to be possessed. Like it could be anyone. So that was kind of one episode when Mary first came around. Another episode, which is kind of off topic and I feel makes me even sound even more crazy. So I'm going to skip through a lot of that. But basically, I had heard from a friend that there was this guy here in Salt Lake who claimed that UFOs follow him and that he was taking people out at night past city lights to see the UFOs. Because he said that the UFOs want people to be aware that they're there so that we're more comfortable with it. And so I invited Mary and my guitarist friend. We went out there. Really crazy stuff happened. I'm not going to get into that here, but I just want to point out that's kind of one of the episodes. That one was actually kind of a positive episode, but it's just really off topic and really crazy. I'm not going to go much more than to mention it. And it plays into something a little later. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Okay.
So moving along, after the previous, I'll just call her Demon Girl. After I was done with her, there was another girl that I was interested in who I met through a friend. She was getting into the New Age stuff, and that's kind of where we connected. Let me introduce you to this meditation and these books, and let's, talk and stuff. And I ended up developing feelings for her. What I didn't know for a while is that, and I'm going to call her Carrie. Carrie was kind of seeing another guy. They weren't like full on boyfriend, girlfriend, but she said, when I came around, she kind of questioned if she wants to be with him or she wanted to see how it played out with me. So I started going over to her house a lot. And I met, so she was born like 10 years after her other siblings. So she's a lot younger. The rest of her family is a lot older. But they all still live together. So I'd go over to her house and her brother David, was a very friendly fellow. He's one of those guys who can just talk and talk and talk and no one can get in a word edgewise, but very friendly guy. So I didn't think much of it. He would often give me rides here and there. And so I liked the guy. He was really cool. It wasn't until about the third visit that I came over that something was obviously very strange, because he just his attitude just totally changed. He went from, I don't want to say simpleton. It's just that he wasn't into the New Age or conspiracies or research or study. He wasn't into the same things that we were. He's just a normal guy,
Yeah.
So as I'm on my way to Carrie's house, I have notes here. So if I stop, I'm reviewing my notes.
No, you're fine.
Yeah. So on my way to Carrie's house, this third visit, she tells me that her family is fighting and things are really tense. And so I'm showing up with that knowledge. But when I get there, and interestingly, everything is totally calm. Her mother is smiling at me. I go into Carrie's room and we're sitting on her bed together. She has like a tiny, tiny room. You can really only fit her bed in a chair. So we're sitting on her bed. David is sitting on a chair across from us. And I guess like a day or two before, he had injured his leg. He told me that he snapped his tendon, but I don't think that's what happened, because you shouldn't be able to walk, right? I don't know.
I don't know.
but the point is, he hurt his leg somehow, and so what he did is he had this bandana that he tied around his leg for some reason, thinking that would help it not hurt. So that's fine. But so he's sitting there, and he's just staring at me, and I feel like he's staring more at me. And it was just like this super dark stare. I'd never really seen someone stare at me that dark before or since.
Yeah.
And he starts talking in a way that I've never, because like I said, he talks a lot, but he was very friendly, but this was extremely different. So what I can remember him saying, this time around, he's saying that aliens are real. He says that aliens are our gods, that aliens are going to come back. They're coming back to Earth, and that they're going to judge us on Judgment Day.
Oh.
And he's staring at me with this dark stuff, and he keeps repeating this theme over and over. Aliens are real. They are our gods. They're coming back for Judgment Day to judge us. And I'm just like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Now, this is why I mentioned the UFO thing previously, because that happened, maybe a month before this, what I'm talking about. So in my head, I feel like they're somehow related. Again, I don't know. All of it could just be garbage.
Yeah.
But he's just saying this, and it's just like, he's never said anything like this before. And then after X amount of time, his leg starts hurting. And so he ends up laying on the ground. One hand is grabbing his leg. His other hand, he is like doing this weird finger gesture at his leg, just like this random finger gestures at his leg. And then he starts speaking, I would just say speaking in tongues.
What?
Yeah. Carrie later told me that he thinks he could speak Native American.
Oh no!
But that's not what that's not what it sounded like at all. It just sounded like gibberish. Something like he's just like just like,
oh god,
just gibberish, but like really creepy gibberish.
Yeah.
And he does that for a few minutes. I remember looking over at Carrie, and she shrugs at me and she mouths the words, "I don't know."
Yeah.
And
she's like, he gets like this. That's just David doing David.
Not exactly, but kind of. He then literally crawls his way out of her room. We close the door, and I'm just like, what the fuck was that? And she's like, I don't know. He's never done anything like this before. I'm like, well, what's the alien stuff about? And she's like, I don't know. Again, this was back in 2012, so History Channel was doing its Ancient Alien series. And so I'm like, was he watching that? Like,
yeah.
What? And she's like, no, he's never expressed any interest in any of this. I don't know. And so, again, I had just come off of the previous demon girl, if you will. Carrie herself is not afflicted, but her brother obviously is. And so that's where my mind goes immediately. And I ask her, could he have an entity around him? And she's like, I don't know, maybe. And
I like how nonchalant she is. She's just like, I don't fucking know.
Yeah. Yeah. I talked to her recently, and she did admit that she's pretty frightened by the whole thing.
Yeah.
So, also in 2012, I was going through, again, I don't want to say new age, but I was going through these workshops, to just kind of clear out your negative baggage so that you can be your best self. I was going through a lot of those workshops, and there's a staff member there, Lolly, who I approached because she claimed to have, psychic gifts as well. She said she specializes in speaking to crystals and stones. But she has, pretty much the gamut of psychic gifts. So I go to her and I'm like, hey, my friend Carrie's brother is acting really strange. What are you thinking? And she tells me to stop talking, and she just like focuses. She does her psychic stuff, and almost immediately she's like, okay, yeah, I'm tapped in. David has absolutely invited something evil into the house. Not only that, but there's also two spirits outside of the house. And I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah. So, Carrie needs to be very, very careful. And she tells me she's going to see if she can, get us a stone for protection. I go and talk to Mary about it, and Mary does kind of the same thing. She taps into me because I'm connected to Carrie because she's my friend, blah, blah, blah. And she agrees, there's something dark about David and the energy he's bringing into the house.
Yeah.
Again, this was so long ago, I kind of get some of the events backwards, but Lolly does, a week or two later, she does come back and give me a Tibetan smoky quartz crystal. And she says, I got this crystal from a source that I trust, because apparently a lot of crystal shops will get their crystals without vetting where they come from. And so a lot of them are sourced through slave labor in Africa and stuff. And so you don't want those crystals. They're tainted, is what I've been told. And so she's like, I got this from a source that I trust. I've spoken with the crystal. The crystal has agreed to, protect your friend Carrie. Please give this to her. So I give it to Carrie. She keeps it. She still has it.
Oh, wow.
That makes her feel, a lot more safer. I was staying the night at her house almost every night because she did not feel comfortable being alone while this was all going on. Mary does agree to see David, but she says that she refuses to do any sort of exorcist type of a process because she said if you force a demon entity like this from a person who isn't aware and isn't expressing their free will to let go, basically, if they don't know what's going on, what you're basically doing is you're pulling a weed out of the dirt and you're destroying what's left. And so it's a very traumatic thing. And that does kind of make sense. Again, The Exorcist is just a movie, but, doing that exorcism is an extremely traumatic thing for that little girl.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what she says is that, I don't want to be responsible for destroying David's psyche because I ripped a demon from it. So she's like, so she says, I'll only do that if David knows he's afflicted and he wants to get rid of it. Now it's interesting. So I'm talking to Mary online when she's telling me that. And what's interesting is the exact same night, Carrie texted me saying that, let's see here. Let me check my notes. One sec.
Okay.
He says he goes into her room and he breaks down crying. He says that he knows that something is attached to him. He says that sometimes he blacks out and he doesn't remember what he did when he blacked out until much later. And when he remembers, he feels a lot of shame. He feels really bad about the stuff he does. What he's referring to, I have no idea. This is just what he told her. He said sometimes when he comes back from blacking out, he finds that he was drawing really disturbing pictures. And then he begs Carrie to continue to love him, support him, please don't leave him, please help him, that sort of stuff. And so she texts me that he's doing this, and we see, oh, well, this is just exactly what Mary's telling me, that he's aware and he wants to get rid of it.
Right.
So I tell Mary that. She's like, okay, great. I'll come over the following day. So I meet up with Mary. We go over to her house. When we show up, Carrie's whole family is fighting. But they calm down because, now they have guests, and that's weird.
Yeah.
So Carrie, David, and Mary and I all go into Carrie's room. Carrie and I are sitting on the bed again. Mary and David are standing, and they're going back and forth. Now, I didn't recognize what was really going on as it was happening. It was only when, in retrospect, looking at the conversation, did I realize what was actually going on. And this kind of goes back to the demon girl I mentioned at first, where she was perfectly possessed, where what her actions and the words she said were 100% influenced by the demon, and she was just a willing agent. And that's basically what I realized was going on with David during this conversation, is that David wasn't really there. He wasn't speaking, his demon was. And only when I started looking at it in that perspective that the conversation made sense. Because again, like I was saying, David talks a lot. So Mary and David are talking. It's mostly David just talking, and some of it's just like what? Like, I just remember thinking, like, what are you talking about? So, but here's what really stuck out. And another thing I want to call out for people to understand is that these things operate on free will. It's kind of like a vampire rules. Like, you have to invite it, and you have to, offer your free will before they do anything. And so what he says to her after a while is, he says, I know why you're here. I don't appreciate you being here. I don't like strangers coming into my house and taking food out of my mouth. And as if David was saying that, I'm like, at the time, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, do you think Mary's just going to go into your fridge and pantry and just steal your food and take off? Like, what?
Yeah.
But if you look at it more as a demon speaking, then it makes more sense. He's saying, I know you're here. I know you want to take David away from me, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
Mary replies, she says, well, I'm not here to do that. And so the demon set up basically what I see as a free will contract. He says, I don't like you here. I don't want you taking my food. Mary immediately agrees, says, I'm not here to do that. As soon as she said that, David stuck out his hand. He said, in that case, I'm David. Nice to meet you. They shake hands, and the contract is sealed. That contract being that Mary's not here to take David away. And so that's kind of the free will thing. It can be really subtle, but it's there if you look for it. So people just have to be careful. Like, I know a lot of people are very anti-Ouija board. I think Ouija boards I think they're a lot of fun if you understand how the free will works. If you go into it all willy-nilly, you can do something damaging. But if you go into it and express your free will saying, hey, I only want to talk to positive entities. I only want to talk to so-and-so. I only want to, you're expressing what you free will want, and then that's what will happen. You can avoid a whole lot of trouble if you just set up that before you start.
Set up your boundaries getting into it. Mm-hmm.
Exactly, yeah. And a lot of people don't know that. They don't think to do that, and then, bad things happen.
Thanks for your call, Brian. Do you have a ghost story that you want to tell on Laughing in the Dark? Email us at litdarkpodcast@gmail.com or write to us in our Contact Us form on our website, litdarkpodcast.com. We may want to feature you on the show. Thanks so much for listening.